Okay, just get my windows. Okay, so first I'm gonna take the easy path first. Meet the behavior for new permits.
Oh, someone's getting reverb. Needs to mute
Yeah, I
something.
need to mute people. Hold on. Can everyone just mute yourself? There we go. And then you just use the chat, or you can ask me to unmute you if you have a question. Okay. So we engaged with most of the utilities, really before we even started designing this part of Excella, because we've heard for a while that our initial attempt at having a 90-day kind of open window period wasn't enough time for utilities to get in, do the installation, and also get their subcontractor in to do the restoration, right? So although we know that extending that to 6 months is not fixing everything, we thought that that was at least helping at least 80% of the issues we were hearing. So the 90-day open window on utility permits has been extended to 6 months in Excella. Now that means that you actually have to have a permit issued in Excella, and then there's also constrainedness around converted permits that we'll get to after this, if we can, the best that we can. All right, so right now I'm just going to talk about the behavior on new permits, like nothing around conversion, just you applied for a new permit after November 9th in the portal. So right now, the 6-month period begins with the earliest use start date for any initial issuance events. And I have visuals of this too that I'll go over in a minute. Because it's really hard to explain this in words, I find. Now here's the tricky part. If the duration of the work extends past the issued duration, and this is how the 90-day open period worked as well. So if you said you need 10 days, something happened and you need to go chase the water leak another 200 feet, you don't know what the heck's going on, and you need more duration, more time in the right-of-way, you need to extend that duration, right, within that original 6 months, or if it goes over, fine. Now remember, on an extension, a true extension, we don't route that out for review to Hub. So you have to do that coordination with Hub outside our extension process, just for extensions. If the extended use period goes beyond the previous 6 months, a new 6-month period will start based on the previous permit expiration. And we have a caveat to this, in fact that there's a 6-month gap rule there. And Michelle, correct me if I'm saying this wrong. So that will work. If you're straddling the original 6-month open window, you will get a brand new 6-month window if you go beyond that permit expiration date. But if there's 6 months in between the permit expiration date and that new start date, right now you won't get another 6-month open period. Did I say that right, Michelle?
Yes, that's right. That's the current behavior, yeah.
So that is a rule that we're going to be revisiting, but that's how it's set up right now. And then another unique aspect to this is if there are multiple uses on a utility permit and one use extends past that earliest use start date plus 6 months, then the permit expiration is just the use end date, right? Because your duration's already kind of covering that 6 months period. So let me show you some visuals around this to try to get your head wrapped around it a little easier. We know it's complicated, and we might work to make this less complicated. But that's how it is right now. We tried. You always try, and then if it doesn't work, we have to come back and, adjust it. Okay, initial issuance, right? So a brand new permit is issued in the portal. You said your use start date is 10/10. You gave a duration of 12 days. Your use expiration, Justin, was that you?
Nope.
Oh, did someone have a question?
No?
Okay.
I will, but not yet.
Right. I know. I expect questions. Yes. Okay. Okay. So your start date is 10/10. Your duration is 12. Your use expiration is the day after the 12 days, right? I think everyone gets that. Whoops. Sorry. What am I doing? Sorry. So the permit expiration, that open 6-month window that you get, will then be the earliest use start date, 10/10, plus 6 months, right? So in this instance, you have a use expiration of 10/21 and a permit expiration of 4/10. That means you have between 10/10 and 4/10 to get the work done, right? So if you need, like, say, for instance, something happened, AA's asphalt's backlogged, whatever it is, if you go past the 4/10 date, you need to extend the permit. Additionally, if you thought you needed 12 days, but you end up needing 20 days, you need to extend the permit.
Extend the expiration, the use expiration?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so what are the, I don't know if it's the right word to use, but the consequence of needing to update that? Is there then a added fee for someone to look at it, or it's sort of an automated thing and it's just that the dates will now tabulate differently for our youth charges? Does that make sense? I mean, a lot of this work on these smaller jobs is for PSE anyways, and I suspect for some other utilities, is going to be driven by a customer ask. A new building's going up. And so we're going to initially guess on a date based on their forecast. And as that date creeps forward, often they say, oh, actually, that's not really when I'm going to be ready. And all of a sudden our target is shifting with the customer's schedule. So it will be pretty common that our initial use date guess may need to be updated to reflect as the customer schedule evolves. And so I guess I'm trying to understand we could do the broad, like, we'll just give use dates for 80 days to make sure it's covered. But I suspect that's an expensive way to do it, because then we're paying for 80 days. Or we can say, well, customer originally told us these 5-day window, and now we need to pick a new 5-day window a month later because they're behind schedule. What is the sort of impact of saying, oops, not 10/10, we're 12/10 instead? We're still within that 6-month window, but now we're sort of saying different expiration use expiration dates. What does that look like in terms of like charges or upkeep of our job in Excella?
Okay, so if you can get the work done between 10/10 and 4/10 under that 12 days duration or whatever,
yep,
you don't need to do anything. Except if you're in a hub, you need to coordinate with the hub coordinator.
So just, and I'm sorry to belabor it, just to make sure, even if we're no longer going to be within the 1010 to 1021 window, so long as we're using 12 or less days, we don't need to do anything, even if the dates have slid. Is that
Correct.
okay?
Yep. That is really the only point of the 6-month open window, right? Otherwise, there's
Yeah, and that's where Mike and Sheriff like, uh-oh, this might not be as helpful, but that's great to
right.
hear. One other question, as you alluded to with AA, so we have sort of two distinctive use periods in our type of construction work. There's the initial utility work and then the follow-on restoration work. Is the system built to sort of acknowledge two separate distinctive periods? When we say we're in a duration of 12 days, does that need to be contiguous or just sort of within the 6-month period, it better be less than 12 total? Or how do you want to see that in how we use the system?
Yeah, so it's still the same thing that we were doing previously,
Okay.
where you have one line that and your duration should take care of both the installation and the restoration work. So as long as AA Asphalt or Hot Mix or whoever is coming in, they don't have to do anything. They don't have to extend the permit if they can get the work done before 410, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Justin, we haven't had this conversation yet, but I've had some conversations with AA Asphalt that, we know that they won't always get to your jobs and other people's jobs within that 6-month time frame. And they will not have the ability to extend your permits unless you delegate that authority to some degree.
Gotcha.
They'll be able to do the restoration inspection notification and schedule that through the portal, but they won't be able to extend.
Right, that would need to still be done by Emily as the point for use on behalf of PSE.
Yeah. And then the other thing I would say, if for whatever reason their original, like if they're on Arterial Street and, all of a sudden they need to do a panel in the travel lane that wasn't originally on the installation traffic control plan, a revision amendment would need to be triggered to capture that scope of work addition.
Right.
Regardless of dates, right?
Okay, so obviously the scope and sort of a technical review would potentially need to occur again, but would we still sort of be able to utilize that same 60-day window if time was still available in it? Or does it, as soon as we're doing a renewed design, it starts the clock over again? Or
yeah, you can do a revision amendment and not touch the dates at all.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the easiest scenario to explain, and then just gets tricky. If you have an extension within the 6-month time frame, so say that your 10 days ended up being 22 days, you can extend within that same 6-month window, easy peasy, just do an extension amendment. That's pretty rare, but it's easily done in the portal. And then if you need to, like, say, for instance, you just weren't able to get everything done within that 6-month period, you can extend beyond the original 6 months. And then your permit expiration would then be the permit expiration plus 6 months, right? And remember, the caveat to this is the use start date here has to be less than 6 months from the previous permit expiration date. We intend to get rid of that rule, but that's how it's built right now.
As we anticipate a job that may be reaching a expiration date, do we want to request that next extension while at sort of within the active period, or are you guys not wanting to see that until we reach that expiration? I guess, does the system allow sort of planning into the next extension, even if it's active?
Yes, absolutely. It does.
Cool.
And then, Emily was kind of pointing out she's already experienced that gap issue where she's trying to get some permits from 2018 finished. And so she's not getting that open 6-month window. And, my kind of guidance to her was, well, just make sure you have some extra days in front and behind the duration you give us to account for weather delays, right? Since we're in winter. And she was kind of like, well, what are the impacts of that from a fee perspective? There's not much, especially if you're on a non-arterial, you're not going to probably see any fee implications. A couple days before and after. So if your original duration 10 days and then you added a day on each end and now it's 12 days, it's going to be very minimal as far as the additional use fees you get charged if you're on an arterial street.
Okay.
That was one of the questions she had.
Right. Yeah, I saw that.
And I'm not sure. I think she's using 10 days. Well, no, actually, I've seen her use 2 days and 5 days as well.
Some of the jobs pre this system would have sort of default used the old 10 or 30
10 days, yeah,
method because it kind of costs the same, so we typically would maximize that window even if we didn't. It's sort of an easy way to work in units of 10. So.
Yeah, our escalation rates have not changed. So technically, if you have a rate start date of 1, your fees are going to be pretty similar if you're 5 days or 10 days, right? It's not going to change much.
Okay.
Okay, then another scenario to know about, and I wouldn't expect this on minor utilities, but definitely could happen on utility major permits, is if you have, 2 uses here. One's kind of like 20 days long, but you have another use that has a duration that's more than 6 months. So for instance, this is 200 days. Your permit expiration is just going to end up being this use expiration, right? Because your duration is already taking up that 6-month period.
Makes sense.
Okay, and then I know there's a lot of frustration around how this looks on converted permits. One thing to know is how Hansen represented the 90-day, the old 90-day open window is now going to show up on your converted permits as the use expiration date, because that's just how it was reported in Hansen. There's nothing we can really do about that. And then Michelle, there's also some rules on how that 6-month open window kind of calculates based on what was in Hansen on converted permits. Michelle, are you able to give some insights around that?
A little bit. So for any permit that was already issued in Hansen, then we brought over the use start and end dates as they were in Hansen, and we brought over the permit expiration date as it was in Hansen. So for anything that was already issued, there was no Acela added 6-month additional window. It was just whatever Hansen had for anything that was already issued. So for anything that was brought over from Hansen in an unissued state, then we brought over the proposed, I guess I would say, use start and expiration dates from Hansen. But then as the reviewers go through and evaluate those uses and get ready to issue the permit in Acela, then they will, either keep or adjust those expiration dates for the uses. And then those will have, when the permit's issued in Acela, the normal first use start date plus 6 months will be added, right, as Melody said. Extensions, though, and maybe this is what Melody wanted me more to talk about, extensions for converted permits, that's where it gets a little funky, because some of the permit expiration dates that we brought over from Hansen, let's say, it was the expiration date from Hansen on the permit was June of 2019, and you want to extend it now. That works. It's just that the calculated new use or the new permit expiration date does not calculate correctly, and we're looking at trying to fix that. That's the outlier that Melody mentioned, where it doesn't give you the right new 6 months on the extensions. So that, if you have an extension on something where the current use expiration date on the converted permit is more than 6 months ago, then you'll want to work with your reviewer on, figuring out what to do with that extension so that you get the right, correct new expiration date until we can get our issues fixed.
Can I probe into that a little further? Because I appreciate that. And I guess I'm aware, I think of an example of one where it was issued and it had a 1 day till it expired the next day or something. I think probably because of that exact thing you're describing, where it was old enough that it just couldn't tabulate out, and so it wanted to expire immediately.
Right.
So happy to work with our permit review group, but what does that mean exactly? How should we sort of manually factor 6 months and just kind of let someone know that we're going to do that? Or what do you want us to do in this sort of interim while the technical aspects are being tweaked? How best to work with you guys so that it hopefully doesn't derail moving forward? But again, we want to sort of open with game plan and not perceived as cutting corners on permitting. So.
Right, and so that's that. Don't do a duration of 2 days, right? Because that's not going to give you enough wiggle room. So again, if you're past that 6 month time frame from the last time we issued the permit, from the last use expiration date, you don't get that 6 month window. So that's when I was talking to Emily about just adding in a couple days to account for schedule delays. And I don't know what that looks like for you guys. My recommendation would go back to 10 days duration on those older ones.
Okay, and we can do it in a 10-day window, but in terms of I guess, again, I may misunderstand because I'm not in the weeds on this like Emily is, but if we want sort of a 10-day window of work time, but maybe, if it's issued and its start date is immediate and gives us 10 days, if we want to go out there in a month to do work, I mean, I guess, can we still sort of factor it as we have 10 days within the next 6 months to do this? Or is it going to be treated like you have to get out there in the next 10 days or your permit expired? Just trying to make sure I
Yeah.
understand that.
Well, it's the latter where you don't have that flexibility the way it's built right now. So I suppose, Justin, we could probably talk offline about how to maneuver that. I'm assuming that some of these older ones, though, is like you're just needing to get restoration out. And if you still
Likely.
really don't know, yeah, we probably just want to talk about that a little more offline to figure out what the best approach there. Yeah, because what I'm seeing so far of these older ones that aren't getting that 6 month window is need the restoration done.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it just depends on how well you guys know of what their schedule is and how accurate it is. Because if you really don't know and they're not being responsive, we want to help you out with that and not make you extend the permit a bunch of times.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and likely, we kind of get them an active permit, queue it over, and then again, historically, it would come with enough of a window that then they kind of schedule it within their crew availability. Obviously, hub's different, but if it was just a simple extension, they have some flexibility. It's sort of typically our process. So if we need to be more precise on those ones, it just may need a different process for us, but hopefully we can sort of work together. Again, I know on a couple of responses, it was like, well, work with your inspector. And my sense is for paying for some days and everyone's sort of aligned, there may be some opportunity to say, okay, this is a good game plan, even if it doesn't quite speak to what the system tabulated it to be. But
yeah, I think we would just need to know more information about you on how accurate or not accurate those days are these days. I just haven't talked to you guys about that in a long time. And then, yeah, we'll have to get the inspectors involved to see what the next game plan, what the best game plan is around that in the interim. Hey, Michelle, I have a question. So say they did extend a permit with a duration of 10 days, but their restoration contractor missed that timeline. Do you know if they are going to be able to submit a restoration job start or restoration notification if they're outside those issued use dates?
I think so. I would need to double check. But the thing to be aware of is that, and maybe you mentioned this and I went over my head, the final inspection schedule date is based on the permit expiration date. So let's say you were in this, in the kind of the situation where your permit expired in last February, right? And you want an extension now, and so you say the extension, let's say you want 20 days. We'll say you're being generous and you want 20 days. So your final inspection is going to be scheduled 20 days from, your use start date, say it's today. So 20 days from 11/20 is your final inspection. So you can work with your inspector you can shift that out, but by default, that's when the inspector is going to show up and expect that work to be done. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, it does. I don't know if this was intended to get into some of the inspection stage troubleshooting, but I do know, I think Matt with AA had reached out with a couple questions as well, and some of the attempting to send in job starts and inspection requests, they were finding on some of these jobs sort of carry over from the old system that again, I don't see it in person, but some of the drop down options, it like only would allow for like the 5-year later inspection or final certain things where it was like, well, that's not the one I need to select, and how to sort of, if it's only giving me one option, how do I set this up with SDOT to get past lack of the option I'm needing. That's not a well articulated question, but I just know they're having a few sort of hiccups with the system wanting to sort of assume they want a certain thing and not maybe having a way to select like a different inspection type or a different job start option.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is if they're not seeing the restoration notification or the job start notification available on converted permits.
Yeah, I think so.
I
get it secondhand, so.
Yeah, that's an issue we've been dealing with a lot of people. They just don't see it, and that's because we did it. Well, you know, conversion is just kind of weird. It's not going to be able to, you know, bring that history over. So I think right now we're telling people to email DOT permits if they need to do a job start, or they can email their inspector directly, Justin.
Yep. I think that's what we're doing. So if that's how we want it to be, that's all good.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had time to check in with the inspectors, but I haven't heard any complaints, so I take that as a good thing.
I'm sorry to be hogging all the airways here. Someone else can jump in, but I did have one other question tied to inspections. Hopefully others may find it useful. Restoration work in Seattle can be finicky to weather, and sometimes work planned for today, you know, it ends up raining more than anticipated and it slides to tomorrow kind of thing. And I guess my understanding of one other little upfront issue we're seeing is the system doesn't want to allow things to push out a day. And just in the nature of restoration work in rainy seasons, that's kind of how it happens. And so how to sort of match up the reality of how they sort of pivot and adjust around rain and how the system says, well, that's not how we do things here. I don't know how to sort of bring the two into happy unity there.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the inspectors really wanted that 2 business day lead time to adjust, and I realize that that's not always feasible when the weather says it's going to be 10% rain and it ends up downpouring. You're stuck and, you know, not being able to work. I think, Justin, that is something to bring up with Chris Lukey and figure out, you know, if they really are. I mean, that's how it's built in Excel. You can't reschedule your job start if you don't have 2 business days in advance lead time.
Mm-hmm.
I understand there needs to be a little more flexibility within that, and how do the inspectors want you to communicate that? I'm not sure. My guess again would be contact the inspector directly. And then also I would probably just say, I know you're not the only one dealing with that. So are they open adjusting that to business day lead time to 1? I don't know. But I would check in with Chris Lukey on that. I don't.
Okay. I actually, yeah, he's got an email from me, so.
I was wondering if I could jump in, going back to permit expiration date. I received a permit yesterday, and the permit expiration date on it is 10/6. So I was wondering how that worked. I did send it to with a question to SDOT permits, but I was just wondering how that came about, that the issuance date was yesterday and the expiration date was last month. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can you give me your permit number?
Okay, it is 416243.
Hold on, it's spinning.
Did that come up?
Yep. Hold on, I have to bring it up in both systems right now during this conversion. Everything is super slow right now. Well, that's interesting. It was never issued in Hansen. Well, it seems just, you had old dates in Hansen in the old permit. It was never issued. So on this one, Steve, you just need to email us what dates you want and we'll get it corrected. But right now you have a start date of 4/6/20, and those were the dates that were in Hansen. A duration of 10 days. And an expiration of 10/6/20. Yeah, how does that work? So you just had old dates in Hansen, and I'm not sure why this was pushed to issue in Excel. I apologize about that. So just send us what dates you want, and we'll get that update and we'll waive the modification fee. Because we shouldn't have issued this with old dates.
Where do I send this to? SDOT permits?
Yep, SDOT permits. And then will you copy me, melody.berry@seattle.gov?